Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Hope you're enjoying your weekend. A little bit later, we'll hear some of what Governor Matt Bevin had to say in his State of the Commonwealth and budget address. We'll get some reaction from Democratic leader Rocky Adkins. The Bevin spending plan would eliminate 70 state programs and cut some others while adding money in some areas as well. The budget debate looks to be intense in the weeks ahead, so we'll have some of that a little bit later. But first, an opportunity to hear from a Kentucky native who is now on the front lines of U.S. energy policy. He was appointed to a key post by President Trump. Being from Kentucky and having worked for Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioner Neil Chatterjee brings insight on coal, which still provides more than 80% of electricity in this state. Chatterjee's responsibilities also include natural gas, nuclear, solar, and other sources of energy. He works to keep the nation's power grid secure. The United States uses a lot of energy, and Chatterjee's also in the discussion about the country's infrastructure and how you move all of that. A lot of that delivering of energy. We want to welcome to Kentucky Newsmakers Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioner Neil Chatterjee, and thank you for coming and welcome home.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you being here.
Absolutely.
For those who don't know your background, talk about your growing up in Lexington, your path from here, and ultimately to this key federal post.
A proud Lexington resident. My parents worked here in cancer research at the University of Kentucky at the Markey Cancer Center. My sister and I are proud graduates of Henry Clay High School. I met my wife, Rebecca Bohan, at Henry Clay High School. My two loves in life were always sports and politics. And my athletic career ended in the 8th grade when I stopped growing. And so after finishing college and law school, I thought about pursuing a career in Washington. And during the course of that time, worked my way up from the bottom, started with an internship, and ultimately got the opportunity to work for Senator McConnell. And I think in one of the underappreciated things about the significance of Senator McConnell's role here in the Commonwealth is he has elevated a lot of Kentuckians to key positions, and was gracious enough to push me forward for this key energy position.
And in this role, you are independent. You have been appointed by the president, but you're not really a member of the Trump administration. So you are there to make decisions based on your best judgment, right?
Absolutely. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC as it's known, is an independent agency. It's a bipartisan board with members from both parties, and we, while we're appointed by the president and confirmed by the United States Senate, we work independent of the executive branch. And
I would say you share the president's views on many things, right? Or he would not have been interested in your service on that commission, right?
Certainly in energy policy, the administration's views and Senator McConnell's views are certainly ones that I share.
So this is a president who ran on deregulating. Obviously, some business metrics are responding positively to that, but you're also in the position as a regulator. So how do you balance the responsibility of keeping the public safe with the White House policy of wanting to unshackle business?
So it is a balance, and I think the commission does a good job of balancing those interests. Our foremost responsibility is reliability. We want to make sure that when you go and hit the switch that the lights come on. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of vigilance to ensure that reliability. But we want to make sure it's done in an affordable way, that consumers are being treated fairly. And I think the commission takes our role seriously as we put forward rules that we think strike that right balance between ensuring reliability while also protecting consumers.
What are some things that you do on that commission that people would not realize as the responsibility of an independent group?
So we're responsible for overseeing the wholesale electricity markets, the competitive electricity markets throughout the country. We're responsible for approving projects, infrastructure, pipelines, transmission lines, how it would impact Kentuckians. You're seeing a lot of market changes right now. We've got the combination of cheap natural gas the regulatory impact that you spoke of, which has put pressure on coal-fired generation, as well as a significant increase in the deployment of renewable sources of energy like wind and solar. The combination of those factors in our competitive markets is putting a lot of pressure on coal and nuclear generation, and particularly when it comes to coal-fired generation, that has an impact here in the Commonwealth.
There is always a lot of consternation about energy policy in this country and what's cost-effective, what is the cleanest route, and other considerations. Kentucky coal was in high demand for many, many years. It was the underpinnings of the economy in eastern Kentucky. Over the last 30 years, we've seen a downtrend in demand and in jobs in that. Is that regulations, or is it shifting to other forms of energy?
So I think it's a combination of factors. In the near decade that I worked with Senator McConnell, he was certainly at the forefront at pushing back against regulations that he thought were hurting the industry. And there's no question that the regulations that were put forth did affect business decisions, long-term investment decisions that put downward pressure on coal. But the changing resource mix is also a factor. There's no question that, in particular, the abundance of natural gas is putting pressure on coal, and that's something that we have to just recognize going forward.
Regulations are all put in place for a reason at the time. When you take those and take measure of those and how to rule on some of these regulations going forward, what do you consider?
For me, the most important thing is the impact on the consumer, on the ratepayer. I actually don't even like the term ratepayer. I prefer consumer, because these are people, these are households that have to deal with these cost implications. And I want to ensure that when we're working on a rulemaking, that the customer is getting value for the rulemaking, whether it's enhanced reliability or resilience or future price protections. I want to make sure the customer is getting the most value.
How do different forms of energy compete for federal favor? You know, you may be seen, and you came up through the ranks with Senator McConnell as a Kentucky coal state person. Obviously, there are others out there who are from natural gas states, and others who may have drilling going on in their areas. How do you balance all of that? And how much competition is there before your commission for favor?
So our commission, you know, we focus on markets, and we look at things in a fuel neutral way. So we don't start with a fuel source and work backwards. When we're doing a rule, we work forward in a fuel neutral manner. That said, having had significant experience in the legislative branch in Congress, I've certainly seen how political factors impact the energy markets that the commission oversees. No question, lawmakers in parts of the country where you've got a renewable power are pushing for tax credits for those renewables. Lawmakers in parts of the country that have an abundance of oil and gas push for policies that favor those fuel sources. And no doubt, for years, lawmakers who represent communities like our own have been pushing for policies that favor coal-fired generation. All things that are well within the appropriate domain of Congress. But we at the Commission, we block all that out, and we focus on things in a fuel-neutral manner.
For many years, there was so much talk of so-called clean coal technology. The former first President George H.W. Bush talked about clean coal technology, and he applied that as it had to do with acid rain. That was the major concern there in the early 90s. Now, you know, obviously the carbon emissions, the major concern in the world. When you look at that clean coal technology, have we invested enough? Can more be done in that area to burn coal more cleanly and more acceptably to the world?
I think it has to be a focus. I think if you look back to President Bush 41, you can say that the policies worked, and we do burn coal much cleaner today than we did back then, and you've seen the end results. He achieved what he wanted to when he put those policies forward. Today, as we shift to this focus on climate mitigation, I think increasingly we have to be smart about finding that balance. Look, I believe climate change is occurring. I believe it's man-made, and we need to take steps to mitigate it. But I also see the really difficult impact that the transition away from coal-fired generation is having in the communities around the Commonwealth. Real devastating impacts in parts of the bluegrass. And so,
are you saying we're trying to do it too fast?
I think, look, I believe in technology and innovation and in transitioning to the future, but we have to make sure that as we make that transition, we're cognizant of what the impacts are for all involved. And I think investing in clean coal technology, keeping some of these coal communities viable while we go through this transition is really important.
Do you think that that coal then has a long-term future?
I think even the most progressive forecasts that would take into account the rapid change in our generation mix that we're seeing still see coal as a significant part of our generation mix into 2040. So coal will continue to be a part of our generation mix, regardless of how the speed at which this transition takes place. My concern is I do think we can find that right balance to make the transition to a cleaner energy future while not leaving coal country behind.
Do you think Kentucky finds itself, along with a handful of other states, as it did in the tobacco debates of the 90s, as being out there as a minority voice for coal when it comes to being heard in Washington?
The political headwinds are most certainly blowing in the other direction. I'm just going to be totally candid about that. I saw that as in my work at the commission that the investment that's been made in this transition to an energy generation mix backed by gas and renewables, it's significant. And I think the headwinds are there for coal. That said, coal is too important a part of our energy security and our economy to just immediately be left behind.
All right, Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioner Neil Chatterjee is with us on Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll talk about the security of the grid, what may be right under your front lawn as far as a pipeline and more. We'll talk more about his responsibilities, and then we'll hear from Governor Bevin and some reaction to his State of the Commonwealth a little later on Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT. I'm Bill Bryant, and we are visiting today with Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioner Neil Chatterjee, who is a Lexington native. I'm sure it's good to be home, right?
I love it.
Yeah.
Big game.
Get to see, right? You got that? You touch on a lot of areas in your position, including certainly the power grid. And, you know, a lot of folks just don't like to think about the possibility of a major problem with the nation's power grid. We know there are hackers up to no good, and there are some other challenges in keeping it in place and up and running. What are the kinds of things that you focus on there?
So cybersecurity and preventing cyber incidents is increasingly becoming a significant part of what we focus on. And part of that is due to the fact that we are seeing this technological innovation. And while I love the developments we're seeing and the new and innovative technologies that are coming online, I'm very excited about energy storage, for instance, and distributed energy resources. But with that technological innovation comes risk, and that risk comes in the form of potential cyber incidents on our grid that could knock out power for a sustained period of time. And one of the wonderful things about this country is electricity, and we take for granted the fact that when we hit the switch, the lights always come on. And so in the event of a cyber incident that could take out the grid, that would have pretty severe consequences. So we need to take steps to stay on top of those cyber threats. We work with another organization called NERC that works on standards that industry follows to stay ahead of these threats. But we also have an office at the Commission that works with industry stakeholders, law enforcement, other government agencies to stay ahead of these ever-evolving threats. It's, you know, sometimes these can be viewed as low probability occurrences, but if a severe cyber attack ever did occur, the consequences could be extreme.
Does it keep you up at night?
You know, there's a lot of things that keep me up at night, and the safety and security of our grid for the American people is definitely something that I stress over.
You also oversee gas transmission lines, and many of those go right through neighborhoods, alongside or under roads, in some cases under people's yards. What are you trying to balance there in terms of safety and getting gas to where it's needed?
So infrastructure development is something that is very important, and the Commission plays a key role in permitting infrastructure. And we need to, and I think we do a good job, and we'll continue to do a good job of working with all stakeholders in the process. I'm very sensitive to landowner concerns. Want to make sure that landowners' rights are respected, and balance those rights and concerns with the fact that we do need this infrastructure for our security, for our economy, and for our communities. We need to make sure things are done safely, and that the people have confidence that there will be no risk from these projects when they're lawfully permitted. And we also need to take the environment into consideration and make sure that we're doing things in an environmentally conscious way. And I feel very good about our process. It's not always the easiest process. It's certainly not inexpensive, but I do feel that stakeholders can have confidence when they come to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that these projects will be handled in a responsible manner and lawfully permitted.
What about renewable energy? Are solar and wind becoming more viable options going forward?
Look, there's no denying that solar and wind have really boomed in the past few years. There's a number of factors that have contributed to that. You've got state policies that have promoted the deployment of renewables. You've got generous tax credits that have helped make renewables cost competitive. And the underlying cost of building out wind and solar generation has become more inexpensive, and there's been a public clamoring for clean energy. And so I am very bullish on the future of renewables. I embrace renewable technology and am excited by the possibilities there as we transition. But to the points I made earlier in the program, I just want to be cognizant that as we're making that transition, that all government entities, not just the Commission, Congress, state governments, that we don't leave communities behind as we make this exciting transition.
And this may be pretty basic, but do you take into consideration when there is, say, an application or a movement toward some large solar or wind development, that you might have cloudy days or it might not be breezy enough?
So that's intermittency is one of the challenges, and so the reason that there's been a focus of late, and the Secretary of Energy asked the Commission to look at this, at baseload generating sources, coal and nuclear, that run 24/7, as juxtaposed with renewable resources that are more intermittent. And that's one of the challenges with renewables, but renewables coupled with gas can overcome those challenges. And I think the real breakthrough could come in energy storage. If we get the technological innovation in the energy storage space, where you can then co-locate energy storage to counter that intermittency of wind and solar, it could be very exciting.
In the current concept, does that take a large physical location to do that, to store it?
You'd be surprised at the innovation that's occurring. Tesla, which is really at the forefront of this, they've got these battery walls that can be done without that massive physical undertaking of space.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who at the time was head of Exxon, famously said in 2012 or so that by 2020 or 2021 that America could be energy independent. Are we on that trajectory?
We really are. It's exciting what's occurred in the last decade or so. The genuine revolution that we've had in the gas space has been incredible. What we've been able to find, our domestic resources, our access to domestic gas. If we can get the infrastructure right, we really can meet that goal with domestic renewables, domestic coal-fired generation, domestic nuclear fleet, our domestic oil and gas, energy. The administration talks about energy dominance, energy independence. I think it's a reality, and it's a reality that can happen a lot sooner than later.
As we formulate energy policy moving forward, and these issues come before you, what are your guideposts?
For me, again, what's in the best interest of the consumer? what is in the best interest of the security and safety of our infrastructure and of our grid. And then ultimately, while FERC is a market regulator, if we do things right, if we forge good policy, it will have a positive economic impact, in my view.
What do everyday Americans need to be doing out there that they're not doing right now to move America forward on energy?
I think one of the things that I'm excited to see with this technological innovation, consumers can become much more invested in how they consume electricity. So if you think now on your phone, you can do your banking transactions on your phone. You can, do your shopping on your phone. You can manage so much of your life on your phone. We're getting to the point technologically where you can manage your energy consumption off your phone. And a lot of Americans probably don't think about that, but it's kind of exciting to think that, when it comes to efficiencies, managing your utility bill, and having more control about how you consume energy. It may not seem like the most exciting thing in the world, but if you see some of these apps and some of these technologies, I'm telling you, it's pretty cool.
What's next for you?
I just got this job, and so I hope to do it well. I have a term until the end of 2021, and if I can do it well, we'll see where that leads.
Might you come home?
It's always a possibility.
Right.
I love it here in the Commonwealth.
Commissioner, thank you. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
We hope you'll stay with us. We'll be back with some of what Governor Matt Bevin had to say in his State of the Commonwealth and Budget Address. Led to a lot of reaction this week, and some of that as well is on the way on Kentucky Newsmakers. We welcome you back to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT. Governor Matt Bevin delivered his State of the Commonwealth and Budget Address this week. He says to meet the state's pension obligations and keep cuts across much of state government to just over 6%, a lot of things are going to have to go. Bevin is proposing eliminating 70 state programs. There's also been considerable pushback to that in the days since. Here is some of what the governor said, and we have some reaction to the proposal from the House Minority Leader, Rocky Adkins.
Protection, infrastructure, education. That's the role of government. That's what we're here for. If we provide for the protection of our people, for the infrastructure needed to get goods and services to market, and for the education of our people, that's the pie. That's what this budget is intended to do. I want to encourage you, please, to take this seriously. These are serious times. These are the times that try men's souls. I'd love to sit here and give you lots of rah-rah. Nobody likes the idea of having to cut budgets. Nobody likes the idea of having to make these difficult decisions. There is not enough money, and it's easy to throw stones without coming up with solutions. But now is the time where we need people who are experienced, people who are capable of coming up with solutions to do exactly that. To not just give lip service to working across the aisle, but to truly work together to find what is best for Kentucky. We owe this to the people of Kentucky. We need to actually balance our budget in a way that takes care of our obligations. So many of the things that we need, the protection, the infrastructure, and the education, can barely be paid for, even with this budget that we've put forward. Then there's all the things that we want. If we want more of what we want, then we're going to ultimately have to have the resources to pay for it. And that's going to come by continuing to put seeds in the ground, getting a tax structure, and resolving our pension crisis, and balancing the budget in a way that will attract other businesses. That when you have $9.2 billion worth of investment going into the ground, that the jobs, 17,000 plus and growing, that will come from those investments alone will take root and germinate, and the fruit will be borne for generations. But it will take an environment in which we continue to fertilize the ground. That's your job. I'll work with you, and I look forward to it, but I need and want your support and your help in order to do it. Every year I've shared with you, as part of my address, a book that I would encourage you to read. The first year I recommended that you read a book called Dreamland, and if you haven't read it, I'd still recommend it to you. Dreamland, it's about the opioid crisis. Last year I recommended to you that you read a book called Hillbilly Elegy, that while it's salty and you may not want to have your young children read it, it nonetheless is a powerful tale of what grips so much of our eastern part of our state in particular, but frankly other parts of our state as well. If you've not read that, I would encourage that you do. This year I want to encourage you to read a different book, and you see it up here on the screen. This was published a couple of years ago by David McCullough, the Wright brothers. You say, why that book? This is a book about people who dream. This is a book about people who believe in bigger possibilities. My high school yearbook quote was by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. He said that lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and in passing, leave behind us footsteps on the sands of time. The footsteps that this legislature is going to lay down, that our administration is going to lay down in conjunction with you, that we collectively are going to lay down for the people of Kentucky, someone's going to follow in them.
I would say this, that when the governor wants to talk about economic development and growing the economy, I can tell you that economic development doesn't happen overnight. It's a 30-year investment in infrastructure, bridges and roads, water and sewer, public education, river ports and airports, the incentive program that we put in place over time over the last 30 years, the regional industrial parks that happened here during Paul Patton. So I would tell you, really what's being reaped today didn't happen because one policy, it happened because of an investment that's happened in the Commonwealth of Kentucky to help us grow jobs, to help us attract the industry that we need, that will create the kind of jobs our people need and deserve, and especially in public education. We reformed public education at every level in the 90s, and we were looked at as the national model for education. And now we're looking at education that's lost its momentum, and we got to have a highly skilled, a highly trained, and a highly educated workforce.
That was Rocky Adkins, the Democratic leader in the State House, and somewhat responding to the governor's State of the Commonwealth and budget address. There'll be a lot to hash out and debate in the weeks ahead before a final budget bill makes its way to the governor. That's this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. We want to thank you for joining us. We'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT This Morning. We began at 4:30. We hope you make it a good week ahead.